Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by
Wait, George,
ACEDS.
wait.
Yeah. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President, Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get a chance to not chant, you don't want me chanting, to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to reveal.com, select Resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live Chat. This week we have joining us Martha Louks. Martha is the Director of Technology Services at McDermott, Will & Emery in DC. She focuses, you'll have to put up with me on this, Martha. She focuses on implementing high value and efficiency-driven solutions that improve the delivery of legal services for clients, collaborates with legal teams to develop technology and workflow approaches that align with case strategies, reduce costs, and improve efficiency. It goes on. Has extensive experience developing defensible processes that center on the tailored use of technology and experienced professionals to achieve results for their clients. Evaluates the efficacy of a wide range of technologies to determine which tools are best suited to a matter's unique needs. Martha has a BA from Albion College. We were just chatting before this because it's a place I've spent some time at over the years as well. And in terms of her work background, she's been with McDermott, Will & Emery for over 10 years, starting as a technology project manager and moving up to her current position. So she's had a number of different roles, seen a number of different facets of how all of this plays out in a law firm. 3 years before that as an account manager or account executive and project manager at DTI. And then 2 years before that at Lord Bissell and Brooke as a paralegal. So Martha, you've seen various different aspects in all of this.
Yeah, I've sort of touched a lot of different areas from being a paralegal, and actually I worked a lot in paper back then, which was kind of an interesting experience. And then, going into the vendor side, working at a law firm, and, it's all added up to where I'm at now.
There we go. In preparation for this call, we had a discussion or two. I sent you a list of potential topics, but just before we got on, you said, go ahead and surprise me. So surprise you I will. And I'm going to ask you essentially the same question I asked in an earlier episode of Ron Best, which is set aside what exists, what doesn't exist in terms of eDiscovery technology. Set aside what you think is possible versus what you feel is impossible, practical versus impractical. If you could have the ideal eDiscovery application or platform, think as broadly as you want, anything is possible, what would it look like?
That's a big question. That's a good question. Gosh, I have to think about that for a second. I think probably where I see, a lot of the platforms have really kind of nailed the review needs and the production needs. And so I think we've got a good handle on that as an industry. I don't have a lengthy wish list on the review side, but when it comes to things like short message data, I think there's a lot of room for growth in the industry. And what I would love to see is a platform that somehow lets us collect and consistently format data sources like Slack or Jabber, Zoom chats, Microsoft Teams, which has seen enormous adoption since COVID occurred, and being able to grab that stuff and work with it in the platform so we can review it in a meaningful way. But there's so many different data challenges associated with this. It needs to be somehow regimented, like consistent and repeatable, yet also flexible, because we're going to have to deal with an avalanche of this type of data in the next few years. I think this type of data is the big challenge facing our industry for the next probably at least 5 years, maybe longer. It's just going to continue to proliferate, and we've got to find really good solutions for dealing with this in review. So what would that look like in practice? I actually don't know, George.
Well, let's approach it this way. In this imaginary platform we're thinking of, anything is possible. So set aside any limitations. What would you like to be able to accomplish?
I think what we would need to do is find a way, like, we need to be able to leverage our natural language processing analytics to be able to effectively perform technology-assisted review on these types of conversations, but they're weird because they're really short and they've got attachments and they've got, are you breaking it down by a whole entire conversation from the beginning to the end? Is a day a document or not? So I think we're kind of moving out of document world and need to think about ways of incorporating short message data as basically structured data. How do we make structured data work in a different database?
You want structured data, unstructured data to coexist happily in this platform so that you don't need, as a user, to think about which it is. You can go after
Correct.
what you're looking for.
And then ideally, what you would want to do is seamlessly show a timeline of a person's activity. So, if I'm collecting their phone and their chats and their emails, I could see maybe they're talking with this person on email, and then they take the conversation off to chat. Well, people, have a different way of communicating over chat. So you might want to see whether the sentiment changed, or things like that. And then I also would want to know, are they talking on the phone? Maybe you incorporate call logs or other features of data like that. There's an almost perfect record at this point of people's electronic activity. And what we really need to do is harness the power of a platform to tie these sources together so we can see one continuous line of activity and understand what they're doing, where they're doing it, because people are simply not working inside of one platform anymore, like email. That's not the only source of communication. So we're not going to get the full picture. The whole point of discovery is building facts, determining what the facts of the case are. It's very difficult to do that unless you're actually looking at all of the information in a way that ties it together. And if we don't find a way to work with this type of data, we may actually, I think ironically, find more manual review needs rather than less, if we're not able to use technology effectively to comb through it.
With what we know is a growing volume of data, a growing variety of types of data, even different types of email messages, different types of short messages, but email versus short mail versus recorded video communications versus all of that. You've got all of that complexity and richness. At the beginning of a matter, what would you like to be able to do with a platform? So let's assume you've got to the point where you've got some data, you've pulled it in, the system has made it all, again, magically completely accessible so that you can work with it in any fashion you want. You're there on one end, the data's there on the other end. How would you want to be able to interact with that data?
I think eventually it'd be really great if you could do a broad search across it, conceptual searches, looking for concerning areas within the data, but being able to see activity. Like if I have a search result, I would want to see what are they doing immediately before and after? I think what we're going to end up needing is more of like a contextual search result, because if you've ever worked with some of these little short messages, you might run a search term, let's say a basic search term, and it'll hit on one message, but you have no idea what they're saying before and after, and nor do you know what they're doing in other platforms. So some contextual search would be really helpful to get started on some of these things. And I'm interested to see, I think it would be really cool if there was like maybe a technology assisted review that would score the documents. See, they're not really documents. It would score the communications at both the individual message, maybe a range of messages level, and an entire conversation level. And that way you can start slicing through the data. Maybe it would be really cool if it automatically adjusted the scores in the algorithm based on how the attorneys are dividing these conversations to produce, right? Like if I've got a year of a conversation, maybe I only need to produce 2 weeks worth of it. That's the only relevant portion. So am I doing technology assisted review on everything for 2 years? Probably need to determine what's responsive. But it'd be really neat to have just different ways of classifying these messages, because there's got to be some flexibility built in.
So much, as you said, so much of our industry's attention has been focused over the past 10, 15, maybe even 20 years on trying to optimize the process of reviewing content for production, finding relevant content, weeding out privileged content, and producing what remains. That, however, is only a small part of what lawyers do in the life of a lawsuit and what they need to do with content. What would you like to see lawyers be able to do with this technology through the life of a lawsuit?
Well, it would be great if they could go in and just interrogate the data directly and say, I'm looking for something that supports an argument like this. If you could tell the system, here's what I'm aiming for, find me documents that might potentially support what I'm trying to say, that would be really cool. Almost like asking somebody familiar with the documents, hey, can you go out and find me all the stuff that John Doe did related to issue 1? That it's the same kind of thing, except for you wouldn't have to rely on a search term. It would bubble the documents up to you. It might be neat to put in, even pleadings and things like that, draft versions, and see what it might do to auto cite things or automatically embed exhibits and things like that it thinks are conceptually related to what you're arguing.
So if you are, at least conceptually, if you will, sitting on one side of the table, the computer, broadly defined, is sitting on the other side of the table, you start posing it these types of questions, what would you like its responses to be like when they come back to you?
I think it would be great to have a summary at the top that says, we found X number of documents related to these things. Within this set, here are the people that are talking. Here are the companies that they're mentioning. Here are the primary concepts. And we think these 5 would be your best place to start. We're giving you 100 documents, but start with these 5. And then as you're going through the results, it's constantly updating that search, just like a continuous active learning, so that you are teaching the system and building on your original question. And as more documents are fed in, you can continue to update it. So I think it would have to show the value of artificial intelligence is certainly, classifying large volumes of data and using it that way. But the biggest thing that attorneys can use on the front end is just seeing what the system has identified for patterns in the data. That gives you a smart place to start. You're not just throwing terms out there and seeing what hits. So to me, that would be a really great way to build out a more fulsome type of analysis.
Mm-hmm. I think it would, me too. I think that would be wonderful to have those types of capabilities. Maybe we'll get there. Who knows? We can try.
I think we might get closer.
In terms of, so we'll jump a slightly different direction. And what about clean, uniform standards for data storage?
For data storage,
Yes.
I mean, I think the way I see, I mean, the cloud is where this is all going. I mean, I think there's an appetite for that. As we use more and more analytics, we're going to need the cloud to rent compute power. It's just going to require more and more resources. So, I mean, with that, I think a lot of the storage would be managed on the back end, the way, whoever is writing the software and however they manage it in conjunction with the cloud. But we're sort of going into an interesting area where, like I was saying with the short message data, it's structured data. It's not really a document. So there's no native file necessarily. And so I think some storage, ironically, may go away a little bit just because there's not so many files. There's just, well, I guess email. Email isn't really documents either. Email is technically a database, and it
Right.
sure
Yeah.
generates a lot of volume.
Email is its own form of structured content, and
It
it's
is.
got various fields of metadata, some required, some optional, and then it's got one area where there's a lot of text
Mhm.
or very little text. Who knows? You mentioned cloud. There are, at least today, 4 deployment models for eDiscovery platforms: entirely in the cloud, entirely on premise, a hybrid of the two, and mobile. What are your thoughts about the pros and cons of those 4 different approaches?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, with the cloud, I mean, the pro is just being able to rent the resources that you need as opposed to purchasing and maintaining them all the time, and having a clean and simple interface where the back end isn't exposed to the users. It's a little easier to keep your data organized, at least the back end functions well. You don't have a lot of clutter on your servers and people working in different ways. So there's benefits to that. That said, you're also not working so much on the back end. You don't have a lot of the flexibility that you might have if you had an environment all your own to work in. And it also makes it a little bit more challenging to work with multiple applications. I think, there's no silver bullet choice in eDiscovery. There's different advantages to various platforms, and they perform really well at some things, and in some other areas another platform might be better. And I think we get the best results when we combine tools, and that can sometimes be better if you've got an on-premise environment where you can architect things to your specific preferences and workflows. So it really kind of just depends on, I mean, I guess how you work and what your objectives are, the type of cases, what you perceive as complex needs, and what the limitations might be if you went all in on a single solution. So yeah, so just different factors. I think different organizations could have, a good experience either way.
Text is a lot of what we deal with in eDiscovery. Text in email messages, text in short messages, text from word processing documents, and the like. But there are other types of content out there that we at least theoretically need to be dealing with, especially audio and video. How do you see folks approaching those? How would you like to be able to approach those?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. Especially, I don't know how many more recorded video or audio things there might be to discover in the coming months and years. And what's great about, at least the cloud platforms are really good with this. They can farm out the data to speech to text technology and bring that back in. And then you can do all the things that you normally do with text, right? But having that automatically transcribed and put back into the database is something that we probably will need to incorporate as a standard for a lot of platforms.
What about the
If this,
Go ahead. Go ahead. I cut
Yes,
you off.
if it becomes a major thing that we need to work through all the time. But I still think it's helpful. There's voicemails attached to emails, and it's time consuming to have to listen to those
So
just
getting those
generally.
transcribed would help immensely. What about the video component? How would you like to be able to handle the video part of audio, audio visual content?
Yeah, well, there's, image recognition technology that has where you could do searches for things that it's auto-identified in pictures. And I think that could likewise be applied to video. You could see what's in a video so they wouldn't have to watch the whole thing. And then, like many applications have now, what's of course very helpful is when you play the video in the viewer, it synchronizes with the text on in either below or on the side, wherever it is. So you can both read and watch and make sure you're seeing it at the same point. So that would be a good common functionality to have integrated. But certainly some of these image recognition things would be really cool, because the more information we're able to extract automatically from these files, the more we can leverage our other analytics tools to classify them, so we don't have to spend all this time dealing with junk.
Yep. So I'm going to leap. I'm going to take a little leap to the side here. And part of what you were talking about earlier was sentiment analysis. How do you see that used most effectively? What would you like to be able to do with that you can't do with that today?
Oh my gosh, sentiment analysis is one of my favorite things. It's a great starting point if you're at the beginning of a case and you're not sure what's in the documents. You want to see, how strong is my case? How weak is the other side's case? Are we in a bad position? And you can start with high negativity documents, high pressure documents. Those are the best places to start. We've gotten a lot, or sometimes it could be very positive documents if people are, maybe doing something that benefits them that's wrong. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. But what sentiment does not currently do, and it's really bad at picking up sarcasm, where people, in text, you cannot tell whether somebody's joking. A computer can't tell that, but we can by reading it. There's potential for being able to detect this. And I think we need to incorporate emojis into the emotional analysis of the data. And so, for example, I could identify sarcasm by finding like a negative statement coupled with a winky face or a smile emoji. And those two conflicting sentiments might indicate a joke or sarcasm. And so I do think emojis should really start to be incorporated into some of these analyses, and it can really be helpful in finding and determining what people's intent might have been at the time that they wrote that thing.
I wonder if even with the currently available tools, if you look at something where there's both positive and negative sentiment within the same communication, if that can start. I'm thinking off the top of my head here.
No, why not, right? We can just try it out.
That's
right.
A
really good idea. We should do that.
Yeah. Maybe, build a model on that, right?
That's right. You could. I wonder if that would be effective. Hard to say. I guess it depends on how it's parsing the information right now.
I bet we can try it. I bet we can test it and see how that turns out.
No doubt.
Well, we've covered a number of things. What should I have asked you about that I haven't?
Oh, I guess it's more, I don't really know. I mean, we're just at a weird point in our industry where it's funny. I was thinking about it this morning, George, like, what would we talk about? And I remember distinctly a couple, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I talked to a bunch of folks that said, I feel bored in eDiscovery. It just feels boring. And I think that is not the case. Like I see a lot of disruption from coronavirus, like everybody is seeing. Mm-hmm. And I think we just need to be gunning for really cool and different solutions to deal with all these remote platforms. Well, when people went remote, they started using different platforms. So, yeah, I think I guess it's really just about the disruption in the industry that's coming up. I don't know what's coming, but I think it's going to be very different. I think we're seeing companies working on solving these problems, and someone's going to come up with some really good solutions. And I also think, frankly, as I'm talking out loud, thinking out loud, I do think we as an industry, we've got to come up with some agreed upon standards for dealing with some of these new data types. And we can't control how they will be formatted when we collect them because that's in the hands of the companies developing them. But like email comes out in a few typical formats, I think we've got to really start focusing for now at the beginning. If we go through the EDRM left to right, when we're collecting data, before we process it, we've got to get it into a usable format that once it's processed will actually function and do all of those amazing things that we were talking about. But the foundation for it is clean and consistent and agreed upon formats and standard practices. I think we really, as an industry, need to have a conversation about how we're going to meet the needs of litigation and deal with these data challenges and still make it usable and work with the technology we've already developed. But we're not quite there yet. So we'll have to see how that unfolds in the next couple of years.
It gives us a great challenge to work toward.
Absolutely. Yeah, not boring at all.
Yes. Well, thank you, Martha. It has been wonderful. Martha is Director of Technology Services at McDermott, Will & Emery. I'm George Sosha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Thanks for joining us today, and please join us again next week when we talk with Luke Smith, who is CEO and Head of Customer Delivery at Legal Tech Innovations, LTI, in Belgium. Thanks again, Martha.
Thank you, George.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related